I was going to actually ask Santosh to come in at this point, but I think I'd come to you, Nandita, because you really will extend Catherine's point about artistic communities and how you see them and how you use the city as a resource, if you like.
I think the introductions have clearly stated me to be the outsider, the interloper, so I don't really have to make excuses for why I haven't been able to write a book. But basically what I do is actually use the possibility of art to re-look at the old so that new social engagements are established between artistic gesture and society. In simpler terms, if I use some examples, for instance, the use of, say, the storytelling traditions that exist in Bengal, and the use of that practice to become a communication tool for, say, HIV awareness, and the Potua to become a community health worker, or to use the lights of Chandanagar that you see very often on the streets of Kolkata every year during the Durga Puja to become a storytelling exhibition through animation of the lights that is inherent to it, or to become a three-dimensional installation, say, on the Thames. And even now, the project that I'm most intensely engaged with is to redesign the pandal or the marquee that you see in Calcutta during the Durga Puja to become knocked down so that it can extend its use at different locations all over the world. So even though it's created in Calcutta by the artisans who know best how to make them, it can be repackaged flat and transported to a site for which it has been designed and will be reconstructed there. So it's very clear from the kind of things that I'm doing, and I'm just using the examples pertinent to Bengal at this time, because clearly the city that I identify most with is Calcutta because of the familiarity, because of the way in which I engage with it on a daily basis. Like Bachi said, that Calcutta for me is not a subject in the way that an author would use a city, but it's a resource pool, an inspiration. So I carry bits of Calcutta to the rest of the world, even though it's repurposed, rearranged. And under the framework of today's discussion, which is the city as a muse and the imagined village, I think there are just two issues that I'd like to kind of bring up for discussion, as and when Bachi kind of organizes it that way. One is that what makes an artist choose a particular city to be his or her muse? I use the Anita Singh's work as an example because I have been involved in its creation to some extent. She is a Delhi person, completely at home with north of India, but a large bit of her work actually has to do with Calcutta. So is it familiarity that really kind of points you towards choosing your muse, or is it the absence of values that you feel should have existed in your environment, as it has been in her case? If you look at the ladies of Calcutta, you know, the layered nature in the photographs of the women in Calcutta, it gives you some kind of pointers to what exactly an artist finds as a trigger when he or she chooses a muse. And secondly, the second part of the framework that we are in, the imagined village. I mean, whose imagination is the village? If you're looking at it from the urban imagination, it's the idyllic kind of, ponds and trees and children playing and women in the fields. But having worked at the artisan level, at the grassroots level, the imagined village from the artisan is a completely different village. They envision something which is much more aspirational, which is much more contemporary, which is much more urban. So when we are looking at imagination and the village as an entity, we have to actually try and understand where you're standing when you're imagining this. I think I'd like to leave my kind of points at that and make up some of the lost 5 minutes.
Okay, thank you. Santosh, would you bring up the rear? Don't fall off that edge.
Yeah, actually, in some ways, when this subject was sort of proposed, and I thought a bit about it, and I thought about my own sort of attempts to write, I couldn't really, in any way, argue that my muse has been a city, and I tried hard to imagine and then sort of think about a possible connection as to whether the city has in some ways, in any way led to the content of the writing, and I couldn't really see any connection. But I think in a curious way, the city that I have spent a significant amount of time in. I sort of grew up all over India in a typical public sector kind of a childhood, moving from one township to another, spending a few years and then moving on. But a fair amount of time in Delhi, and then I have worked essentially in Delhi, and I've lived in Delhi for the last many years. And I do find that in some curious way, and perhaps for reasons that do not normally lend themselves to a city being thought of as a muse, perhaps Delhi has in some invisible way acted as providing a kind of framework or a structure for whatever I write. My interest is really in documenting the everyday life of India, and to look at things that we take for granted, that are trivial, that seem to be so obvious and natural that they escape attention. And the idea to sort of excavate the obvious and to try and infer some patterns and to see reflections of ourselves and the change that we see around us by an examination of everyday life. And somehow it seems to me that, when I look at Delhi, it is a curious city because in some ways it's a city that has a magnificent history, and yet it's a city that is almost totally untouched by history or any sense of history. It's a city full of monuments and with again, to use the same bad pun, monumental disregard, for everything. And I remember, taking a group of people who had come in from Southeast Asia, from Gurgaon to Noida, and we passed, so many monuments, and they kept asking me, so what's that? And I said, some ruin, some other ruin, And at that time, it occurred to me that I had absolutely no sense of most of those, and they were spectacular structures, and they were clearly deeply embedded, and they had wonderful stories that no doubt surrounded them, but there was something about Delhi that did not favor them with any attention, that seemed to be, a monument is a place that you build a traffic roundabout around, it allows you to do that, and so it has a bureaucratic kind of a sort of a regard for some structures which it maintains, but there is no sense of it being interwoven into the lives and consciousness of the city. And this almost disavowal, this walking away from, and the ability, and if you look at Delhi, it is many cities. But these are many cities that sort of sit together almost in polythene kind of separateness. They don't seem to have anything to do with each other. And therefore the most manifest experience of Delhi seems to be in the latest version of the post-1947 influx. The Punjabi Delhi, in a sense, is what sort of decants itself on our consciousness, with unfailing regularity. And that's the Delhi that has increasingly become the dominant face of Delhi. But in a curious way, because in some ways, unlike, and to me, when I look at Kolkata, particularly, I find the contrast to be quite striking. I'm an outsider in the city, although I've lived in a place called Oyeah for about 5 years when I was a child, and I used to pass the city all the time, but I've never really had much to do with the city. But in the last few days, for instance, last couple of days that I was here, when I'm in this city, I call up everyone I know here and we meet up. When I'm in Delhi, I never do that. When I'm in Bombay, I never do that. There is something about this city that seems to value memory, where the notion of time does not lie in its passage alone. With somehow Delhi, there is a sense of time being perpetual and transient. And in Calcutta, there is almost a geological sense of time, in a sense where it kind of, when it retreats, there was a conversation today, in the same lunch, where I think Mehna was talking about Mr. Mukherjee's skills as a raconteur and telling a story about how the Oxford bookstore was a place where in the early days Marxists used to come together and pass messages through books. And that kind of stories and the sense of pride or a sense of a certain a sense of thrill at that kind of a narrative which you exchange, I would find it completely not part of a Delhi experience. Somehow it just seems to be so Calcutta. I mean, it just seems to be, and it does not seem in any way to resonate with the Delhi view of time and the sense that and therefore the reason why, to come to the reason why I do think that it has its uses is that therefore all of everyday life in a sense is up there, it's manifest, it's up there, it's visible. In a sense, if you look at Delhi, the idea that you are who you are as a result of where you're going to and not so much where you come from. And the fact that therefore life is lived aggressively in the present tense. And all the markers that you create are markers that must have common currency. And therefore the bigger car is common currency. But there is energy there, and there is a certain vitality there. There is, a lot of people argue that Delhi is an overgrown village for its attitudes, and for a whole set of highly reasons you can understand. But I would argue that in some ways Delhi is perhaps a more modern city in that it does not carry too many vestiges of the past, and it does not negotiate identity in terms of the past, but seeks to construct it through, yes, acts of consumption, through acts of visible signification, but it is asserting in all ways a perpetual sense of now, and where the individual is always at the focus. And the individual has, yes, a limited imagination because there isn't a cultural past to pull deeper perhaps imaginations from, but there certainly there is a certain creative energy that as a result gets unlocked and unleashed and therefore enables a certain kind of view of the world. Speaking for myself and sort of winding down, I think that in some ways, I think sociologist Satish Deshpande has in his book, on contemporary India uses a phrase to describe the way sociologists see the world, and he says it's a squint, and using what he calls a picturesque sort of Bihari phrase. He says it's like looking London, talking Patna, that ability, and he says the sociologist must have the ability to do that, to look at the current reality while simultaneously being able to look at the frame around that current reality, and therefore being able to characterize it. And therefore this ability to be simultaneously inside and outside, to be simultaneously a participant and not a detached, cynical commentator, but as well having the ability to look at how reality gets constructed. I think in a sense Delhi is a wonderful place because reality is getting constructed on a daily basis. It is getting constructed through the efforts of every individual in their own, sometimes highly flawed, but always a highly interesting way. And I think therefore, for someone trying to document middle class India or trying to see, and in a sense theorize the present instead of in a sense going back to the past, I think Delhi is perhaps a great place to sort of, for that particular project. And that is my sort of explanation, if any, of the city as Muse. Thank you.
Yeah, I finished with all my panelists. I hope I haven't left anyone out. Okay, now I really would like to, it's what Santosh said to end in his conclusion. No, I've got extra space. What Santosh said in his concluding statements is what I'd like to take up, to start our discussion. And that is that it's really today's cities are in such a state of flux. They do not seem to be the cities that we recognize. They don't seem to have the values that I think all of us, to some degree or the other, belong to that sort of generation. And the buzz, the energy, the brashness is in different aspects of the city, even different locales of the city. So it's no longer South Bombay, it's Oshiwara, which is no holds barred, completely different set of values, hub where all the television production is happening, where it operates on a completely different scale of values and a completely different time zone also, if you like. BPOs have created that same sort of structure. And Rajarhat in Calcutta is, I'm sure in 5 years down the line, it may, I mean, I can see everyone in this audience who would cringe at what is happening in New Calcutta. But that is where the future is. So now, as a writer, as writers, do we, how do we embrace this reality? Do we keep questioning it? What really is our ambivalent attitude towards this? Because it's not anything you can run away from. And in a sense, I think it is also an extension of the modernism that came into, say, English poetry from the time of rattling breakfast cups in basement kitchens, as opposed to the nightingale singing in the woods. So really, what is it? Today's urban balladeer is talking of traffic jams and the broken pipe. Today, even if you read the edit in the Times of India, the shires are today not about the raise of the mistress's eyebrow, but about the rape happening in the house next door. So really, how do we interact with cities in this process of change? Would you like to start, Zach?
Yes, absolutely. Because this, I think, links with my feeling that cities are like a cancer or like an aberration. I mean, the way they grow, I hope nobody here in the room takes offense that I mention cancer often, and I hope nobody of us ever will get that disease. But the earth gets that disease through the cities that we build, and that is what makes the city so fertile, as for a novelist especially, because the way the cities change by the way they grow, their